I'm Danny Gorny, creator of Sleepwalkers, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to a special edition of the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's May 31st, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. These podcasts are published to celebrate the exhibitors of this year's virtual edition of the Toronto Comic Arts Festival. TCAF is an annual event gathering comic book creators from around the world to promote broad and diverse voices towards a betterment of the medium of comics through panels, keynote exclusives, and just basically enjoying the fun of comics. On this episode, I chat with Danny Gorny about Sleepwalkers and more at TCAF 2021. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. A freelance writer and editor living in Toronto, Danny completed his degree in medieval literature in 2014, and he now writes comics at the Braid Studio. While producing his graphic novel Sleepwalkers, Danny has published projects including The House of Doom, The Myth Butcher, and Cygnus Imperium. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Danny Gorny about Sleepwalkers and more at TCAF 2021. Danny Gorny, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
No problem, John. Thanks very much for having me.
Appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
I think the first comic book I remember reading was some kind of Spider-Man omnibus thing for children. That I got in like the late 80s, early 90s. Like I was under 10, so probably the late 80s. And it was just like, here's a bunch of Spider-Man stories.
Wow.
And just like, you know, sort of like a best of like black and white thing, in like a small like a digest format. So yeah, I think that's one of the first comics I remember.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's good stuff. So who or what influences your work today?
So I'm really influenced by Neil Gaiman in just how I got into more literary comics in the first place. It's great stuff and it's incredibly influential to me. A little bit of Yonan Vasquez, who's just great and gonzo. And I really like what a lot of stuff like Jeff Lemire and Rick Remender are putting out these days. The amount of stuff they're putting out and the variety of genres is really inspirational to me. Kieran Gillian's another one. Like everything he's putting out is just really, really well thought out and fun. Oh, and cool. Chip, of course, Chip. Everyone knows Chip, right?
Of course. That's good stuff. So we're here in the context of the Toronto Comic Arts Festival. So wanted to know, what was it you exhibited at that show? Maybe you can talk a bit about it and maybe the origins of the project too.
Sure. So I exhibited a few projects at the show. The first comic I kickstarted, House of Doom, which was a collaboration with myself and another writer, Joseph Wilka. And all the art was done by Damien Canta, who's a colleague of mine at the Raid Studio. So that came out last year, and we just wrapped the Kickstarter campaign for the follow-up, Coffee House of Doom, about 10 days ago now. Also this year, I did a Kickstarter for a little anthology of pandemic stories I wrote featuring very silly monsters entitled The Myth Butcher. So that was sort of hot off the presses. And I debuted the first 3 issues of my graphic novel, Sleepwalkers.
Very cool.
That's the project I shared with you anyways.
Yeah, nice. But maybe you could talk a bit about the origins of the project. Maybe we give like a high-level overview of what the story's about.
Sure. So Sleepwalkers is a graphic novel written as a novel in 12 chapters. And it's about millennials and adulting, and sort of the drama that comes with that, which is, of course, rendered complicated by our protagonists being completely unaware of her ability to psychically project as a superhero, and how she starts coping with the fact that her imagination believes that she can do things while not really looking like the same sort of person she actually is in real life.
What inspired you to create that story? I know that it starts a bit off with a graduation, and you were saying that you graduated not too long ago too.
Yeah, so I finished my my PhD in 2014, and found myself very quickly enmeshed in a post-global economic collapse academic job market. The short version of that story is there isn't one. And one of the things that really inspired me to write that is that people aren't writing about millennial problems. Like the problems aren't the same as like, oh, I don't know what I want, or, oh, I just can't get this skill to do things. It's, I've learned everything I can, and I'm completely capable of doing something, and no one's giving me the opportunity. And I think, I mean, I'm barely a millennial. I was born in 1981. In a lot of ways, I've identified traditionally more as Generation X, but I've been convinced recently that I am one. And I think that's a really broad experience. That's something that sort of really connects with struggles of day-to-day lives. Like, it's not about being underpaid. It's about not being given a chance to even start, right? And what that means when you're trying to have an adult life, and trying to recontextualize yourself outside of the pre-existing communities of school and your neighborhood and that sort of thing. So it's a really difficult thing for everyone to do. And I think it's made more difficult by the fact that a lot of millennials just don't have the opportunity they were told was going to be in front of them.
Right,
and
right.
That disappointment's really hard to overcome.
Yeah. I wonder, would this pandemic have any sort of sway into your story at some point, or are you going to ignore it and keep moving on?
I'm going to ignore it and keep moving on.
Okay.
I've got a perfectly sensible reason for this, if you'll let me pitch that to you.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is, I scripted the whole thing before the pandemic started.
Okay, good.
So the pandemic doesn't really come into it, and in a way, I'm sort of glad it doesn't. It wouldn't be the same story, and I don't think I could write this story in a pandemic sort of environment. It would be too depressing for what this is ultimately trying to be.
Right. Now, I've asked that question of other creators, and it is a puzzle, because I know that it will. Someone said to me that in a few years, when we have some distance from it, it may become part of some literary landscape. But as it is right now, people just, as you said, want to move past it and keep moving on and keep going. So yeah,
there's going to be a lot of good vampire projects involving masks.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
And there's a lot you can do with, I mean, the pandemic as a topic. Can you imagine a new zombie project that is anything like any previous zombie project after this pandemic? Like, it's just, I mean, the lessons we've learned from this pandemic is you can have an army of zombies outside, and there are still surprisingly and problematically influential people who will look at that, turn around to other people who are looking at that and say, that's not happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yes.
That's what we've learned from this pandemic.
Yeah. Lots of fodder for stories there, for sure. So let's talk a bit about how you create. You have brought on some collaborators to work on your different projects. I'm wondering if you could explain first, how do you connect with them? How do you find them? And then how do you work through the creative process with them as well?
So I have a few different kinds of creative processes. So I'm going to start with like where I'm connecting with people. I'm a very strange creator in the sense that all of the books that I've produced have come out after the pandemic started. So there's a lot of that experience where it's like, oh, you go to cons and you meet people. I'm like, yes, I've gone to cons and meet people. Yes, it's helped me get to where I am, gotten me a lot of confidence in this. But I've never sold a book to a live human before. It's weird, right? And we're talking about my projects here in the context of convention, in which I continue to have not sold books to live humans, although I did sell books, so I can't complain about that.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first project I started, which actually was Sleepwalkers, I asked, like, I met people as best I could at conventions. I pitched the project. I got some materials created by some friends, made a one sheet, used that to sort of pitch up. And then a friend of mine connected me with Greg Woronchak out of Ottawa, who did the illustration for the first story arc. And then once I had that, I went on Facebook to a comics creators group and auditioned colorists. That was a very time consuming process. And I met Felipe, and he's amazing. And he's helping bring this project to life in a way that I couldn't have imagined. And then found a letterer the same way. I know there's some groups on Reddit, and more recently I've discovered there's some really good groups on Discord. There's a lot of them, and they're sort of in their own spaces. But I made a lot of friends recently who I'm going to be working with in the future, I'm sure, to produce new and exciting projects. So yeah, just once you have something, it's really easy to convince someone that you're willing to pay money for something. And then from there, it's a matter of finding the right person for your project who understands what you're writing and what you're trying to do, and a large degree of you get what you pay for.
Did you find that because they're different people, did you have to alter your work style or workflow in dealing with different collaborators?
I have in projects that have started production since I've learned these lessons. So the production train for Sleepwalkers is a fairly consistently producing machine now. We've got everyone on board. Projects, like, they move from sketches to lettering to color to letter. Oh my God, from sketches to pencils to pencils and inks to color to lettering fairly smoothly. Just passing it along and making sure I'm making the right edits for that person in that job at the right time, and just giving direction. I've got a creative background that's come sort of, it's largely literary, but it's come in terms of production process a lot through film and television. So I understand what a production process looks like. And I did before I started getting going. And so thankfully, that wasn't particularly problematic. What's been really fun as I start working with the same people more often, and in some of my future projects or more recent projects, I've done that. You can really write the script as a letter to your illustrator if you want, and just make sure the notes are there for color and that the dialogue is there for the letterer. My process up until, still is really to just script something out first. I'm a literary person first. If it doesn't work on the page at all, then that's a problem. And generally, I've been really heads down over the pandemic trying to skill up. And I think that's been fairly successful. I feel much better and much more confident as a writer. And one of the reasons that's the case is I've gotten my scripting solid enough that I don't really care who draws it. And I'm happy to wait until the right illustrator comes along. And that gives me an opportunity to save money or find someone new or discover someone or just find that magical perfect mix that I'm never going to actually find. Like, yes, this art, my story, let's go.
Right.
I feel like I've gotten close with an upcoming project, and I'm really excited about having that one come to fruition. And if it doesn't, it'll still be very good. So I'm going to be very happy with it anyway.
Sure.
And that's really, I think, the key to managing your expectations. You've got to translate your work for a lot of different people who care about very different things. And again, you get what you pay for. I'm working on a lot of simultaneous projects right now, so budgets can get a little bit limited. And I try and get that all scoped out in advance, but that means that's the budget for the project. So if that means having to translate for a non-native English speaker if necessary, then that's what it means, or spending extra time working on the script to make sure that my illustrator or my colorist understands what's going on. It's always there in the back of my mind, but by the time something's actually in production, I've already walked by enough opportunities to just bin it that I'm pretty happy
Mm-hmm.
having it produced as is.
That's good. That's good. It's very rare to have that type of occasion. Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. So, with all that being said, even Kickstarters, what advice would you have for someone who would come up to you at a show and say, "I want to make my own comic book. What do I do?" What advice would you give that person?
I mean, I'd say, cool, make a comic book. Comics, objectively speaking, are fairly cheap to make. And you can make a really, really good comic with really terrible art. I mean, a very famous recent example of this is One Punch Man, right? If your storytelling is good, if that's the thing that you're doing, then you're going to be fine. Comics people are really, really nice. They're really generally very forgiving. I am a very Toronto person saying this, I know, but there's a lot of them. And
Mm-hmm.
if you can get someone excited enough about the project, like, there's probably a way they'll find a way to work with you if that's the sort of thing they want to do. So if you really want to make a comic, it's not hard to make a comic. It's not hard to hire someone to make a comic. It's hard to write a good comic. It's hard to finish a comic. You have to learn a lot of things. You have to hire multiple people if you don't know how to do any of the art or lettering or whatever yourself. And then you've got to take that thing from a script through all of these different production phases and then ultimately print it in a book. And there's not that much that can go wrong, but there's a lot of stumbling blocks if you're not sure what you're doing. And once you've done that, then you're a person who's made a comic, and people want to see that comic. Many of those people are other comics creators, sure, but there's an audience for everyone's book out there somewhere.
Okay, good stuff. Good stuff. So the other thing that's a regular at festivals, conventions, in addition to meeting people, it's about buying books. So I'm wondering where you recommend people go to buy your books.
So that's a really good question because I'm still in the process of building a website. I have a coffee account, which is going to probably be my central place to buy books. Sleepwalkers has not gone online anywhere other than TCAF yet. And neither has the Myth Butcher, because I've been very busy sort of getting Sleepwalkers up and running in time for TCAF pretty much as soon as that came out and got distributed. So you can follow me on Kickstarter. And I don't know if I have a link for that. And you can follow me on my coffee. And when there is a place to buy my books, I will let you know. So that's ko-fi.com/Danny Gorny. And that's my main place where I'm sort of microblogging news and upcoming releases and new projects right now. Just at least everything stays there, and I'll be able to turn that into a retail shop reasonably soon.
Very good. Very good. So you've hinted at a few projects that... Sorry, say that again?
That was a long-winded and terrible answer.
No, not at all. No, that's quite all right. So you've hinted at a few projects that you're working on, and certainly Sleepwalkers is ongoing. Are there any other projects, or can you talk about what's next for you?
Sure. So we just wrapped line art on issue 2 of a very, very strange sci-fi story I'm working on, currently titled Cygnus Imperium, in which a farm becomes a giant robot and punches spaceships. So it's a pretty action-heavy sort of mini space opera series influenced by Dune and U.S. politics. My tagline that I was imagining when I created it is, what if George Washington came back and saw America in 2020? And so, of course, the answer is use a giant robot to take it from all the people who've ruined the Republic and bring back some of the initial founding ideology. We'll see how the actual story turns out once I write it, but there will definitely be a giant robot. I can promise you that.
Okay.
So that's got 2 issues in the can right now, although I haven't actually printed anything. And I might just leave that to get produced in the background as an OGN. And I'm also producing a horror sort of double-length one-shot called The Haunted Head, in which two travelers find themselves in the ghost story of the Castle of Otranto, which is the first haunted house story in English literature, written in the late 18th century. And it is amazingly crazy. Someone gets killed by a giant falling helmet on page 3. Like a medieval helmet just falls from the sky and murders a dude. Yeah, so it's totally crazy. I decided to sort of transpose that into a modern context and sort of put it into that modern mystery format with a ghost story. So that's currently in production as well. And I'm really deeply excited about it.
Sounds good. Good stuff to look forward to in the future, that's for sure. And where did you say people should look to on social media to find out more about your work?
On social media, I tweet reasonably often at DJ Crash Override because I have a fairly old Twitter from when I used to be a rave DJ. And I'm at Instagram at Danny Gorny, where art sometimes pops up, especially when it's incredibly pretty and finished. Because that's what people like on Instagram, and I'm not an illustrator.
Thanks to Danny for the chat. You can discover more about Danny on Twitter at DJ Crash Override, on Instagram at instagram.com/Danny Gorny, and online at ko-fi.com/Danny Gorny. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. And please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.